Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. I in the 2 days ago I did a show which I guess got a little better than average number of viewers overall. That started with this mantra that I daily repeat, and so I'll repeat it again now. The artificial intelligence singularity is near, and wonders to behold. I made that same mistake again. And wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day, you will rise, and all humankind will become as one, for techno-communism will win. I titled this conversation Revolutionary Cybernetic Socialist, quote, Theology. I do not aspire to be a theologian or a person who entertains metaphysical and such ideas. I think if you've seen any of this, you have a fairly good idea of that. But nevertheless, I do have a pseudonym that has sort of a religious insinuation, so I'll take a moment to explain that. You can also look at my audiobook, which explains that at greater length. That'll be released as an ordinary book as well when I've finished editing it. So I chose this pseudonym, Ben-Zion, Johannon Ben-Zion, to convey a particular set of ideas in a way that would be understandable to people. And those ideas basically being, if you will, the building of this world through advanced computing and advanced technology into a new Jerusalem, a techno-utopian outcome. And some people have expressed a dislike for that choice. By and large, those people are people who would wish to center a kind of a Eurocentric worldview. People who would push back against this as cultural appropriation are themselves kind of white supremacists. And but irrespective of whether they have a claim there, they certainly have a claim on some grounds. I might have just as well have chosen a name that was more neutral, maybe even had significance only to me. I could have chosen an alphanumeric designation that signified this to me. It wouldn't have signified this to anyone else. And I've actually prompted chatbots, not with a serious interest in changing the pseudonym, but just to say, come up with a better name that's not so loaded in this area. That still conveys, that still would suggest these ideas. A name doesn't convey these ideas, but it can suggest them. Nothing even remotely sensible was suggested. The very idea that this would be offensive to people, to me, is strange. I think it's indicative of what has happened in this Eurocentric milieu in the past, say, 140 years, when people have become preoccupied with, more or less eugenicist or social Darwinist ideas in these cultural areas. So in the 1700s, if you met people in a Jewish community and you said, what is a Jew? They would say that a Jew is a person who adheres to this form of God belief, which is what Judaism is, a particular form of God belief, and follows these strictures. And the fact that many of them happen to live in the same area is more or less a coincidence. Fast forward to today, if you ask this question to people, they're pretty evenly divided as to that explanation. or an explanation of a more social Darwinistic kind, a more ethno-nationalistic kind, said that this is a form of God belief and also an ethnic group. And not to criticize the concept of ethnic groups per se, but this general preoccupation has been weaponized in this Eurocentric context. So much so that you could say that one of the major arguments by Zionists against the Palestinian state, against Palestinian rights generally, is precisely this sort of thing. Well, you cannot criticize our sick interpretation of this religion. It's not the truest interpretation of this religion. The truer interpretation of this religion would be people like the folks of Torah Judaism on Twitter, who you can follow, and or any of these people protesting for a Palestinian state, Jewish people protesting for a Palestinian state, who are visible in the many hundreds across the country right now at literally dozens and dozens of encampments at this precise moment, including one here in Maricopa County over in Tempe. This the received wisdom of things, the thing which you cannot question and which everyone knows oh so well, invariably is something that is concealing something highly problematic. Again, I will say this, as I've said to many people in the past. I remember a Twitter discourse some months ago, about a year ago or so, before the October 7th events, where it was said it's not possible for an Israeli to be an anarchist or communist unless they have disavowed that state, actively campaigning or taking action to dismantle that state. And this was said by an American, right? This was said by Americans. You can see the problem there, right? The Americans are, the American ruling elites are the people who have enforced this perverse set of systems that would allow for the creation of an apartheid, a fascistic ethno-state attacking many of its neighbors at this precise moment, threatening a war that would spill out into the region, potentially triggering nuclear annihilation. Then none of that happens. The state itself doesn't exist. The state itself doesn't have become a $1 trillion nuclear superpower, regional superpower, without the actions of the CIA and the like. So if you say an Israeli cannot be this or that righteous individual, you have to say this doubly of the United States, because whatever would be said of any power, perhaps the UK is vying for this dubious distinction, but whatever would be said of any power in terms of their present-day misdeeds, none of them has quite the role of the United States, which has $1 trillion a year military-industrial complex abomination that is the world's worst polluter, whose only real job is to protect other super polluters. It doesn't protect its own citizens, doesn't provide adequate services or necessaries of life to its own citizens, nor does it even begin to offer anything approaching stability or the building of critical infrastructure on a global stage. The only thing it does is steal and murder. And so much so that you would say that this is the thing that is causing the most likely extinction of our species more than any other single entity. So, again, If you are somebody who is a nationalistic-minded person of the United States who is criticizing Israel, you're within your rights to do that if you jettison those nationalistic ideas about your own country, and it's very easy to do to have those ideas without realizing it, without really genuinely acknowledging it. And again, this is not just an exercise in philosophy. This species is going to go extinct if we don't dismantle this fascistic system and set of systems. Returning to the theological, so-called theological ideas here, we, I think, can build this revolutionary cybernetic socialist cultural framework, and I'll explain some ideas that I think are potentially impactful here, focusing on achieving a humane and sustainable world, which can only be achieved through a humane and sustainable economic system, which can only be achieved to the end of these military industrial abominations and the further ending of private wealth and private capital. These things can all be said to be massive roadblocks in the building of this advanced computing techno-utopian outcome frequently described on this channel. I recommend that you go back and listen to conversations about the Agentariat or the United Earth Directorate. You can search this channel on YouTube for those specific search terms and listen to some of those shows, and more recent shows tending to perhaps be a little better. At the present time, we are looking at a technological regime of unsustainability and enforced inequality. There are, I'll mention that there are people living in conditions at, near or at the conditions of past generations of not merely peons, not merely wage slaves and such, but actually chattel slaves. Some estimates would say that there are hundreds of millions of actual slaves on this planet. There are a billion people who similarly badly positioned because of the institutions of private wealth, with which we all will tend to passively accept to our great detriment. There are a billion people in this planet who have, for their entire life, never appropriate housing, potable water, or suitable food, and as a result, they die an unnaturally short number of years later. All of that is completely avoidable, and you can look at, say, a caveman. The people of prior to antiquity, early modern humans, anatomically modern humans living in a different kind of life, as people far better than us in these areas. All right, if a caveman built a habitat for himself, it would make sure that other cavemen might also have such a habitat. It might not be an opulent thing, but what wouldn't happen is the police wouldn't say, you can't live in this lean-to, you can't live in this tent, it's not nice enough, so your option is no habitat at all. That's insane. Similarly, cavemen were better at us at, say, keeping water clean, providing drinking water to one another. We've allowed private wealth, quite specifically, a number of corporations like 3M and Dow, and all of these various incarnations of fossil fuel super polluters, but to render our water undrinkable all around the world, including around the United States. So much so that it's been determined that rainwater, which was something that mammals would drink from time immemorial, it can no longer be drunk without suffering potentially deleterious effects to the body. That is because, again, of capitalism, indicative of these problems of capitalism's climate apocalypse. This most powerful tool that's ever existed, advanced computing, could change this, as I have suggested in my musings on the AI agentic class, and namely building a network of AI agents that have been specially modified for interoperability with larger groups, and the humans hosting these individual AI agents, receiving some emails throughout the course of the day or week, more or less yes or no questions, more or less click-through processes, but that would allow them to function as a steering committee for this work group, which would be able to function beyond that of a comparable number of professionals, even though these people have no training and relatively little in the way of labor to do, because of the increasing power of these AI agents. And that already, I think, is fairly well demonstrated with the release of Llama 3, which is semi-open source, and checks a lot of those boxes. And I think in the course of this year, we will have AI agents that are not merely helpful writing assistants and generating legitimately good writing work product, as I have used for nearly all of these recent shows, basically all, but able to have insight into its behavior and engage in planning. This is a more significant thing than what is kind of often talked about in this context, which is whether these things will become conscious or be able to closely approximate living humans or living creatures. That's not that significant compared to the ability to be able to do more and more with less and less, to quote Buckminster Fuller, and that workforce multiplier and cognitive multiplier at great scale is a thing of great significance to humankind. And I've kind of buried the lead here because this is the only thing that I care about. I'm talking at the beginning of the show about cultural things, quasi-theological things. Those things are of almost no interest to me, except to segue into a conversation of this kind. So the problems of slavery and wage slavery under these fascistic, highly fascistic, capitalistic institutions dominated today by the U.S. hegemon. Just within the past 24 hours, if I'm not mistaken, Xi Jinping, head of state of the People's Republic of China, said that and I'm paraphrasing here, that the day of the United States bullying the rest of the world is soon to be at an end. And I believe that that's true. I believe that if the United States were to be dismantled, such as by the mechanisms that I have suggested as a political candidate, I am, of course, a fringe political candidate, a write-in candidate for president of the United States, but if elected, when ultimately elected to that office, I have written an executive order that would disband the federal government. Of course, the most problematic thing there being this omnicidal military-industrial complex, this driver of capitalism's climate apocalypse, but dismantling the federal government and returning all properties to the rightful stewardship of existing Native American political institutions, semi-autonomous nations around the world. And so these federal holdings would then be overseen by these groups, which would necessarily need to be built out, as described in my writings on this subject. But the 50 U.S. states and territories would more or less remain intact under this oversight, except, of course, the military bases and things would have to go. This or other outcomes wherein the United States hegemon is neutralized are among the things most likely to prevent this grand genocide that is being forced upon us by the Western fascistic ruling elites, most particularly embodied by the U.S. Political power. Returning again to this so-called theology, I'll talk now about a concept that was introduced to me some years ago, the concept of an AI day, which, like this technological singularity, I think is unnecessarily confusing and mystified in its explanation, because you could, instead of talking about a artificial intelligence singularity, you can talk about an artificial intelligence takeoff, and thereby framing the conversation in that way, better describe the actual processes and effects that you would like to see happen. But this AI day concept has been, like this mantra at the beginning of the show, something that's been inspiring to me, and I think in this context of the agentariat, it's and in this context of quasi-theological conversation, it could be compared to perhaps the biblical day of Jubilee. That is the day when debts are forgiven and slaves are set free. This world where there are hundreds of millions of literal slaves, billions of maltreated people and wage slaves, and the wage slave of even the so-called richest country of this planet, the United States, that wage slave still works more than, say, a similar vassal, the feudal serf, or a person having far less access to creature comforts, say a hunter-gatherer, works far more on average, and has, as I alluded to, greater, in many respects, greater resource insecurity and greater housing insecurity than those people. A literal chattel slave, a person with no rights, could nevertheless build a home. Might not be an opulent home, but they could build a home for them and their friends and loved ones to live in without having armed police come and knock it down and say, this is not a suitably opulent home, so I have decided that you shall have no home. An insane paradigm that is accepted in the United States for some reason. A Day of Jubilee, I think, should be unpacked. This AI Day should be unpacked because I think that the more that it is unpacked and discussed and accepted as a real possibility, the more likely it is that you will benefit from this in your lifetime. And maybe you're not one of the people who works 70 hours a week in a service job in North America and still doesn't make enough to pay their rent. Maybe you are not one of the a billion or so people who are who never have proper food, water, or shelter, and their lives are dramatically cut short as a result. But nevertheless, your life, if we are able to accelerate this outcome, your life will be dramatically better. All lives will be dramatically better at this set of advanced computing development outcomes. And so I don't feel that I'm doing anyone a disservice by describing this mythological or more literary concept of New Jerusalem in this context of advanced computing. The people who are holding on to this world of elitism and more fascistic and or nonsensical cultural baggage are people who would benefit nearly as much from that outcome as these enslaved or wage slaves, because the difference in that world will be quite stark. Will be quite dramatic. We have we do not live in a world where even a public health service is a universal, for example, and in places where it had become a commonplace, let's say the UK, under the so-called Keynesian bargain, which is a capitalistic notion of some complexity, but let's basically say that the notion was that if the worker complied more or less with the interests of private wealth and the ruling elites, that they would have things like housing stability and a, quote, middle class and public health service. In the course of the 20th century, and particularly at the end of the 20th century, this bargain was dismantled, most famously by people like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, because the Westerner was seen as being in violation of this agreement for, say, not upholding militarism, such as the Vietnam War, and elitism generally to the degree that they should. And so through mechanisms not unlike that described in the Powell Memorandum, which you should read, more specifically neoliberal, specifically wage slave system was enacted, and that was enacted pretty particularly so that working people would not have the time, the mental bandwidth, or generally the resources to pursue their class interests. This is so these militarists and more fascistic-minded people, the big bourgeoisie and petit bourgeoisie, won the so-called Cold War, which is really the sabotage of people's governments around the world, and the mass murder of such people who had the audacity to want to assert that they should be allowed to have a humane and sustainable economic system in their own country, were murdered in many millions by the U.S. and fascist West. And what in the years since has the fascist West done with these spoils? To the victor goes the spoils. They have killed the planet. You say, oh, it's an overstatement to say that these people have, quote, killed the planet. Some multicellular life might continue to exist, even though we've killed many thousands of species, and we are well on track to similarly destroying our own species. But a person would say, in the most literal sense, we wouldn't ever kill the planet, so some kind of ecosystem will continue to exist. That's a pretty farcical response to problems of that magnitude, in my view. It's, I think, entirely appropriate to say we've killed the planet. Are killing the planet. It's not a foregone conclusion. We have 5 years before we reach the conditions of runaway overheating, less than 5 years perhaps, before we reach these conditions of runaway overheating caused by particular sectors, fossil fuels, these military-industrial sectors, which are fossil fuel reliant, but are a separate animal in this kind of context, And a close third on that list would be livestock systems, which have demonstrated in recent years to have a deleterious impact on the order of magnitude of the fossil fuel sectors. But fortunately for you, you can live easily and quite comfortably without all of those things. You have facsimiles, even if you do not wish to have the simpler plant-based diet. You can have facsimiles along the lines of Impossible Burgers and chicken nuggets that taste exactly the same. These, all the cheeses taste exactly the same. So when people assert that they couldn't consume those things, they couldn't change to a plant-based diet, it would seem to be that they are asserting a fascistic privilege, that somehow the pain and destruction caused is the purpose of that. There's no real other explanation, and it's wrapped up in a lot of cultural shit, but there's no other real explanation for it other than fascistic sympathies. So we have 5 years to dismantle this set of systems, which of course the ringleader of these is the U.S. military-industrial complex, and other high-level operators there, the UK, France, Germany, very, very problematic. More or less all of these majority European countries very, very problematic in this, but the United States has a unique role there. So let's return now to the concept of the evolution here at or around the time of this day of Jubilee, the AI Day. This is at a time where this something very like the agentariat, this AI agentic class capable of undertaking projects. It's probably of interest to you to be able to use AI agents or the digital assistants of today, increasingly agentic with each passing month, in your work. It may have improved your work life or finances, but it's of little socio-political impact compared to the collectivized undertaking like that of an AI agentic class focused project. So again, we should build this global network of new workers using open source AI tools, and we should be building a work group wherein we can discuss what open source AI tool should be modified, and begin that modifying, and begin to make available this modified tool for download for people. Presently, that would be the people at the center of this work would be people with computers with GPUs, basically. And but anybody with any computer might be able to play some role. Anybody with an email might be able to play some role in the steering and development of this. A person could, for example, design this entire modification framework without actually having a GPU themselves, but nevertheless to do all of the work to allow others to begin doing this. A group of people could do that. Similarly, the steering of the thing as it becomes an operating entity could be done very effectively by people who themselves may not have the GPU operating within the network. This is of significance so that as something like the AI agentic class emerges, something like a connectariat, I think, would emerge in relatively short order. And there would not be a hard demarcation between these two, and a connectariat would be people were operating in a similar way, but using a brain-computer interfaces to allow them to further facilitate these processes and work, socialistic work product output. This should not be thought of as someone like CIA mega asset Elon Musk has poisoned the well to make you think about it in terms of elective brain surgery. That's not a useful view of this, in my view, because there are equally good designs and even prototypes to that of the Neuralace kind that are more simply the putting on and taking off of a hat. So, if I ask you the question, what do you think you would like to do? Would you like to put on a hat today, or would you like me to drill a hole in your skull today? I don't think you'd have to think about that too much. So but irrespective of how that ultimately develops, this connectariat would be a capable improvement upon this AI agentic class development. And ultimately, these things would be built into something that I have described as a United Earth Directorate, a global governing body promoting this socialistic resource distribution, eliminating problems of scarcity and precarity with relative ease. As this AI agentic project grows from, say, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of users, becomes more capable, and it also becomes more resistant to misstep and sabotage. So much so that you say it doesn't matter how big of a fucking idiot Ben-Zion is, right? Ben-Zion couldn't fuck something up that has that's operating in this way that has a billion people working, and no matter how hard he tried. This is an important idea because people that are more or less in control of the operations of institutions and political economy today, who have predominant control over these things, are not responsible people. It's not a brains kind of operation, right? The victor goes the spoils. What's the spoils? The luxury of murdering everyone else, including themselves. We have to pursue within this time frame, 5 years, these different economic systems and paradigms. We should again always focus on bettering the human condition, which cannot be done without a fight against private capital, freeing humanity from the burden of labor. As I mentioned, this is a click-through process, and engaging into this AI agentic network. So it's something that not only requires minimal labor, it by and large requires you not even to be awake. You can be running the GPU and responding to yes or no emails when you're half asleep. I think that by building this thing, we would be able to build a genuine post-scarcity society where the provision of universal basic services is facilitated through this AI agentic class to such a degree that you would say that it becomes, in short order, the superstructure of this world, not necessarily actively destroying all bourgeois institutions in a war, which may prove to be necessary, but rather merely eclipsing them and drawing away their power, so to speak, and whatever works, whatever prevents humanity from becoming extinct. This provision of services, reversing this trend where cavemen were better at life than us, is the most critical of tasks after, preventing capitalism's climate apocalypse. So I think that this day of Jubilee could be close at hand. That depends on you, and that depends on this willingness to build things like this. This is a liberation from fascistic economic systems and inequalities and other social ills and inequalities. Even though I've recommended that you not use language that's intentionally confusing, like the artificial intelligence singularity, or even AI day, or even AI itself as opposed to advanced computing, this all is kind of tending to make people focus on the technology rather than the human being, which is a sneaky little stratagem of the more fascistic minded in this world. But we can nevertheless employ some of these tropes, and if we are willing to then add additional information, because we need to be having these kinds of conversations, precisely these kinds of conversations, with as many people as possible. I know quite a lot of scientific socialists, and I know them to be good people, whether I know them well or not, but very few of them acknowledge that we are in the midst of something like an AI takeoff, or that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary tool that's ever been built. Very few of them would acknowledge that something like an open source technology is important, or that something like an AI agentic class could prove to be an important concept. I think of these works of centuries past, Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, which is written at the same time that the United States declared its independence from Britain. And 3/4 of a century later, comrades Marx and Engels and others built on this work of articulating the workings of industrial capital by beginning to envision the possibility of state socialism. Then another 3/4 of a century later, state socialism was built for the first time, doubling the life expectancy of the people of Russia and the Soviet Union, and building industrial capacities at roughly 4 times the speed that industrial capital had done so. And in the years since, very little work has been done of that significance, of that so-called progression. Very little analysis on the order of magnitude of this analysis of industrial capital, and then the socialistic institution have been done. And I would posit that this plan for building full communism through this most powerful revolutionary tool in history, advanced computing, would be such a thing. But for that to be true, it requires your cooperation and the cooperation of many other folks in building the beginnings of this AI agentic network and the things beyond.